grandson of Herb Gildin and producer of this wonderful, poignant movie of escape and survival. Tyler Gildin is a director and producer who grew up on Long Island and whose previous works have earned him 4 New York Emmy Awards. In 2018, Tyler formed his own production company, Gildin Media, where he works with brands to create their social and commercial video content, as well as develop his own original films. Tyler's latest documentary, The Starfish, won the Audience Award for Documentary Short at the Syracuse International Film Festival and is currently available on Apple TV, Prime Video, Vimeo On Demand, and several other streaming services. As part of our panel, I would also like to introduce Erin Greenbaum, a senior director of HIAS, which continues to function to help those in need of refuge and asylum. Erin Greenbaum has worked in and around nonprofits for nearly 15 years, with a background in corporate philanthropy, nonprofit fundraising, and consulting. As a senior director in HIAS's Public Affairs Department, she gets to do what she loves, meeting and talking to people and helping them do good. Erin also oversees the HIAS archives, which date back to 1909. I will leave it to Thorin to pose some initial questions to Tyler and Erin, and look forward to hearing them connect the past with the present, as well as HIAS's role in helping refugees yesterday, as well as today.
Thanks very much, Marae. I hope that Tyler and Erin can click in. There we go. Welcome, both of you. And as Marae said, I will pose some initial questions, but I'd like to make it clear that we'd love the audience, you guys out there, to use the Q&A function and type in questions that you're interested about hearing about from Tyler about the film and from Erin about HIAS. Maybe before we do any question, let me ask a poll. And this is a way to get your feedback. I'm wondering, have you seen the film The Starfish? I know that we encourage people to see it beforehand, but I also know that maybe that was not always easy for everybody. So I'm just going to give you a few seconds to click in your answers. I see they're coming up. Looks like some have and some haven't, but I'll share the results in just another, let's say, 3 seconds. These things are pretty speedy. All right, I'm going to end the polling. So here's the results. Looks like almost 50-50. So 48% yes, 52% no. So thanks very much for doing the quick poll. It gives us a sense for what things we might want to go into more detail on in the description, and what just kind of how some of the answers will be. So let me launch an initial question while people are putting some of their own questions in the Q&A box. And that's to you, Tyler, just to ask you about, give us the elevator speech that maybe you developed when you were coming up with the idea for this film, or a quick summary. What is this film about?
Sure. Well, firstly, thanks for having me, and I appreciate everyone who's attending and listening. And for those of you who watched the film, I really appreciate it. And to the other, what was it, 52%? I hope the other 52% after today feel inspired to watch it as well. But yeah, The Starfish is the story of my grandfather, Herb Gildin, who, when he was 10, along with his 2 sisters who were 12 and 14, were growing up in Germany, and due to the help of HIAS, really were able to escape Germany and live with 3 separate non-Jewish families in a small ski town, Falun, Sweden, for about 2 years before ultimately, thanks to the help of HIAS, being able to reconnect with their family and live in the US. And the film follows their journey a bit. And my grandfather went on to be a successful business person and never really told his family about his story until about 60 years later, ultimately leading to a really nice reunion in Sweden. So that's pretty much the gist of it. It's a human interest piece. It's a piece about persistence and survival, and really above everything else, human kindness. And the individuals, these Swedish families, and the HIAS organization who stepped in and made a difference, and ultimately were able to help these 3 children and their entire family, seek refuge and live a better life.
Thanks. I mean, I don't think you do it justice. It's really a moving film, a touching film. And there's so much in it that I hope we'll get to in the course of this discussion. But let me also bring Erin into the discussion and ask a question for you, Erin, which is, you know, in the film we see, as Tyler said, his grandfather Herb and his two sisters are helped by Hyus to go to Sweden to escape Germany, and then are helped by Hyus to come to the United States to meet their parents who'd escaped from Germany also in 1941. And I'm just wondering, to what degree is their story unique? Were they the only people? Obviously not the only ones. We know Murray was also helped, but how many people was Hyus helping in this period during the war? And what were the kind of range of services that Hyus was doing?
Well, I don't think that we had, I don't think we have exact numbers on how many were helped during this time. A lot of records were lost. Some of our offices were actually raided by the Nazis during the war and then by the Soviets after. So there are definitely spots. There are some gaps. But at the time, just to give you a sense of scale, we had about 150 either offices or representatives. We had offices or representatives in 150 cities around the world at that time. So we were trying to help as many people as we could. In terms of the children getting out, I mean, we were hoping for a whole lot more. We pushed really hard. Even back then, we had a really strong advocacy operation here in the United States, in Washington, D.C. We were fighting really hard for the Wagner-Rogers Act, which would have been, it would have brought 20,000 Jewish children here. We actually got Eleanor Roosevelt in favor of it, and then it wasn't able to pass. In the end, about 1,000 children were able to get out, you know, and most were not able to reunite with their families. It was actually pretty rare for children to be sent out of Europe and then actually for their parents to follow. I don't think that it's not that we weren't trying to also bring the adults out, but that, you know, we were looking on every front. If we could get a whole family out, then that's what we could do. And if we could only get the children out, then that's what we did as well. And we weren't just looking to send, you know, as you can see from Herb's story, we were placing people anywhere that would take them. We had operations in Latin America that were trying to get kids placed. We were doing it in other cities in Europe, at wherever we could.
Okay. Tyler, did you know how important Hyus was to your grandfather's story when you began this process, or what did you learn about Hyus in the process?
I definitely knew when I was going into the story, the role that Hyus had played. Obviously, I didn't know all the details, but that was pretty apparent. You know, my grandfather had made that very clear in the first sit-down interview. I guess before I interviewed him, no, I didn't really know. But after I just had the first conversation with him, it was pretty evident, and I did immediately reach out to someone and start to at least have a conversation, let them know the film I was looking to work on and any photos or information. So they were pretty helpful throughout the process once I had reached out.
Yeah, you stopped by the office. We got to meet you very, very briefly years before the film.
I was in the office. This was pre-COVID days. I was.
What's an office?
I was in the office. And now since then I've even traveled to the headquarters in Maryland, and we did a pre-screening almost a year and a half ago at this point. So yeah, it's been a bit of a journey, but Hyus has definitely been super supportive along the way. So I definitely appreciate it.
Tell us a little about the journey. When did you start the project? It seemed like some of the interviews were done maybe 15 years ago. Is that right? And so what was the process? How long did it take? What inspired you?
So no, the process really from my standpoint started 2 years ago. It was actually, is it 3 years ago now? Wow. So, okay, it was in May of 2017 is when we first started filming. And it was really in February of 2017 where my grandfather's older sister, my great aunt, Seal, when she passed away, it was at the funeral that my grandfather told in his eulogy just the story about them being 3 young children and, you know, taking a train to Sweden, what that was like, and taking a train across Europe and Soviet Union and coming all the way to the United States. I mean, and just the detail he gave, and it was so clear the admiration he had for his sister. This was all stuff I really didn't know. I mean, I had known my grandfather was from Germany. I knew that Sweden played a role, but it just wasn't something we necessarily sat down and spoke about. My grandfather was a very forward-thinking person, not one for nostalgia, not one for let me tell you about my background. He just wasn't like that. It was more of what can I do for you and what can we do moving forward and what's progress. He wasn't one to reflect much. So because it was a eulogy, and I think he was really coming to terms with the loss of his sister, who was somewhat of a pseudo mother for him for a period of time, it was so evident how strong that bond was. As soon as I left that funeral, I turned to one of my siblings and I said, I got to sit down, Grandpa, and film him. I didn't know if it was going to be a documentary. I really didn't know the extent. I just said I'd be foolish to at the least not sit him down. I have access to production equipment. I have means to make this happen. How can I not sit him down and at least have this conversation? And then ultimately, once I did, I was inspired to continue to tell the story further.
But you had film footage of his visit back to Sweden that had been taken well before that, and other film footage. I mean, really, it was incredible, the footage you had.
I was very lucky. The amount of archival, footage and the assets. It was some 35 millimeter film. I had a lot of photos. It was a lot of pretty much begging my family for every photo and video they had. And it wasn't, everyone was supportive, but not everyone necessarily, goes into their attic or into that last, left, right, in their basement. So a couple of family members, I just showed up at their house and was like, let me take one more look and just see. And I was able to, the amount of assets we have is pretty incredible. But, I think without them, it'd be so hard to tell the story. It would just be talking heads. I thought that was pretty important to really be able to see some of that footage and those photos so you could really feel like you were there and connect with them as children, not just kind of hear about them speaking of them as children.
One of the things I loved about the film was that just when I thought I understood what it was about, you change topics and explore some other amazing story. So at first I thought it was about, children being sent away from their family to escape the Holocaust. But then it changes, and I think it's about, living in Sweden during the war and adapting to life in Sweden. And just when I think that's what the story is about, then you shift again to the tale of the amazing journey across Asia, across the Soviet Union, and through Japan, and out to America and across America. And I think, that's what the story is about. And then, no, that's not it. It's a rags to riches story about your grandfather coming here and really struggling and becoming a very successful businessman. But no, that's not it either, because then there's the just like amazing story of his return to Sweden and meeting that Swedish family that he had grown up with and he hadn't seen in so many years. And so I'm wondering, were all those chapters in your mind when you started the project? And maybe were there some other chapters that got cut on the cutting room floor that were even better that we just don't know about?
Sure, yeah, and all that packed into 40 minutes, so that's pretty jam packed. It was really as the interview process continued of just finding out more stories, and but I think that's important because he, at the end of the day, he lived 90 years. So if you're going to tell someone's life story over the course of 90 years, that's a long time, and obviously we focus on certain periods. But yeah, he, from the age of 10 to 12, lived in 3 different countries, speaking 3 different languages. I mean, there's so much there. And there was, as I was doing the film, I'd say the biggest challenge for me with the film is when it's such a personal story like this, it's my grandfather's. To me, it could be 6 hours long and I would be happy because it's my grandfather's, my story. But to me, it was, I didn't want to just make a family film that we were going to watch, every Rosh Hashanah and it was just my family. I wanted to make a film that people who didn't know my family could watch and connect and empathize with. So it really was trying to figure out what are those most human moments, what is the story details that matter to to the average person and not just my family. And there were things that we ultimately cut. There was, more detail into the family business. There was a little bit more detail on my grandma and her family. But I did a lot of test screenings with a lot of different people throughout the process. And I was trying to look for the themes of where people seemed to be interested the most, what was resonating the most, what just seemed like it was just extra details I was putting for the sake of, I just wanted to put it there. And if you do enough of those test screenings, you can kind of put together what's really the crux of this that I think the most people would connect with. And yeah, I mean, it has a little bit of everything. There is the rags to riches entrepreneurial story. There is the love story between my grandfather and my grandma as well. There is the, just historic, if you're into, historic pieces. So there are a lot of different things in it. So yeah, I think that was important for me to try to make it the most appealing and impactful piece as possible.
And it really helps keep it moving too. I mean, because you're shifting, there's a lot to the story. So very nicely done. I'm going to jump to a couple of the questions that I see coming in. One is about why your grandfather, or why your grandfather didn't tell that story earlier, and why did he feel he needed to keep his journey a secret, even from his wife. I think you talk about how, or you show clip it in the film about how his wife didn't even know some of that history.
Right. I think it kind of speaks to what I was saying a little earlier. It's just, that just wasn't my grandfather. He just, I mean, some people are storytellers. My grandfather is not a storyteller. He is a visionary, moving forward person. And I just think that, you know, it was somewhat of a troubled, you know, childhood. And I think it was something he just wanted to tuck away, and he, you know, saw himself as an American Jew, and he just wanted to focus on the life ahead of him. And, you know, it really wasn't something that he thought was necessary. And obviously he eventually told, to an extent, my grandma, but what's actually funny is, you know, he really didn't tell, like, my dad and my aunt really didn't know about any of this until like around 2000. And what's actually funny, my grandma told me this morning, which I don't even know if you realize this. So my sister, when she was in 5th grade, actually did like I guess you have to do one of those biographies on a family member. And she actually was one of the people who opened up my grandfather a lot. And actually at the museum, they're actually, my grandma told me this today, that my sister's 5th grade paper is actually at the museum. So I don't know if you probably didn't realize that, nor did I, but it actually is there, which is pretty funny. It's really full circle. But yeah, I don't think, you know, it was kind of that. And then my aunt was the biggest proponent of my grandfather opening up. She was someone who wanted to know about her roots. She even studied abroad in Germany when she was in college. She just really wanted to know more. And yeah, I think that she was a big help. And in 2001, they opened up and they went back. But then even after that, for the last 20 years, it really wasn't spoken about much again until I recycled it again after my aunt's passing. So again, I just think my grandfather was very much in the present and the future. And he just, it wasn't something, I don't think he wasn't ashamed of it. It just wasn't something he felt was necessary. He didn't want people's sympathy. He didn't want people to look at him differently. He wanted to be judged as, Herb Gildin, the businessman, the family man, and, that was it.
There's another question, or several that have come in about HIAS that I'm going to pass to you, Erin. One is really about when did HIAS get started and where are its roots? And then also, I'd be interested if you would tell us a little about, does HIAS still exist today? Obviously it does. And what are you guys doing today?
Great. Those are two of my favorite questions. Yes, HIAS exists today. Hello, everyone. We were founded in 1881 in the context of pogroms in Russia. The landscape in New York for immigrants was very sectarian. So you didn't just have these organizations that helped everyone. The Protestants helped the Protestants and the Catholics helped the Catholics. And so we and many organizations like us, the HIAS of today is the result of many mergers along the way. There wasn't anyone necessarily standing for the Jews. So when we were the Hebrew immigrant, back then Jews were referred to as Hebrews. It's actually part of why we tend to just go by our acronym, because we don't really call Jews Hebrews anymore. So we were in the model of settlement houses. We had offices on Ellis Island. If you needed kosher food, we would do that. A lot of times people would arrive malnourished and then they'd get stuck in the immigration controls because there was no kosher food on the ships, certainly not if you were in steerage. So they would refuse to eat for the whole journey, and then they would come and be malnourished and be held up in immigration, and we would come and feed them and also advocate to keep them from getting caught up in that. And then we would do a lot of work around connecting to families in the United States. And then when the United States gates closed with the Quota Act of 1921, which was kind of made permanent in 1924 and held all the way until 1965, we shifted our focus to being about helping people who are either already in the United States, but then also helping people get out. So we really kind of started based on like helping people who were already here. And then the next phase was about help rescuing Jews from other places. And that's why we had the role that we had with Murray's family and with Herb's family and so many other people, both before and after the war. We have the letters that Otto Frank wrote to us trying to get out. He got visas a couple times and the government kept causing problems for him. But we were the people he wrote to. So, and thousands of Jews wrote to us. That was what we were trying to do. But it's a bigger conversation about why more people weren't successful. It speaks to a lot of anti-Semitism. And then after the war, we played a really, really big role in getting people out of DP camps. The concentration camps emptied into these displaced persons camps, and you had to prove that you had a connection to someone in the United States in order to get here. And then you had to contend with all of the different quotas. And so in my role with the archives, I can see the caseworkers talking back and forth, being like, is there room on the Russian quota? No, there's not. Have you tried the Polish quota? What about the rule for people who were children during the, there was all this negotiation, and that was a really big piece of the kind of casework that HIAS was doing at the time. And once the Refugee Convention happened in 1951, we were involved, refugees became like a legal category, and that's a direct response to the failure of the world to take in the Jews of the Holocaust. It's a direct response, because there was no right to show up on somebody's doorstep and say, we're being slaughtered over here, please let us in. And no one let us in as a result. And so we were active throughout the ensuing decades in various conflicts. We helped people get out of Hungary during the communist issues. We helped people come out of the Soviet Union. We were involved throughout all the ensuing years. But as time went on, and we as Jews were lucky enough not to necessarily be as threatened, what we realized is that, if we are a Jewish organization that feels that helping the stranger and helping refugees is a Jewish value, then we have to continue to help anyone who is in need. And while part of what we stand for is making sure that should a need arise once again to protect Jewish refugees, that we will stand at the ready. Today, 95% of our clients are not Jewish, and we're very proud of that, because we say that we used to help refugees because they were Jewish. Now we help because we are Jewish, and we feel that it's really important that as a people who have been the perpetual stranger, that we make sure that other people who walked in those shoes, who took journeys like Herb took, who went through multiple countries and suffered so many risks, we want to make sure that we're there for them on the other end, just as we were in the 40s. So today we're in 15 countries. We partner with the UN. We partner with the State Department. We help people get the legal protection they need when we're able to, and our gates continually get narrower and narrower due to the current administration. We do continue to resettle, and we do a lot of work for people who are already here. We have a network of affiliates all across the United States. We're active on the US border, providing help to asylum seekers, both on the Mexican side and on the United States side. We do a lot of legal work to help people who are in danger of getting deported, to bring families together that have been separated. And we do a lot of economic work around helping people become self-sufficient and build businesses and create new lives, just like Herb did. I mean, the entrepreneurial spirit is very strong among refugees, because I like to say that lazy people don't come here. It takes a lot to uproot your life and start with nothing. And those people make great business people, and they just need a hand, and they can do great things. And then we have a big advocacy network here in the US, and also we engage the Jewish community. And then abroad, we are trying to just keep people safe, help them find solutions that let them lead a healthy, secure life with access to their basic legal rights and basic human needs. So yeah, I'm happy to tell you more about any of those pieces, but I'll stop there.
And you do have that lovely background behind you, which shows,
Yes.
I'm guessing, the 15 countries that HIAS works in.
There you go.
We like to see you as part of it. Great, thank you. There's a question here that gets to a point in the film that I'm glad this person raises, because it's a part in the film where there's a kind of, it's not fully explained, and that is about your grandfather's being upset that his mother was not very open or not very welcoming when his Swedish mother came to New York at some point earlier. I'm not explaining the details well, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Could you tell us a little about that, and what you know of why Herb's mother wasn't more inviting, or what Herb felt about it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll never be able to know exactly, what was going through my great grandma Fanny's mind, but obviously you could see in the piece, my grandfather's a pretty, not very emotional person, and that was really the only time he kind of cut me off when I was asking a question, and he clearly showed a bit more emotion about that, and obviously it's something that's upset him, throughout his life that she wasn't willing to. I really think my aunt broke it down as best as she probably could. Is that uh, she must have been must have been such a dark thought for her to think about that. I mean, I understand to an outsider, you would think you want to say thank you so much for taking in my children and saving them, and I think that seems like the obvious thing to want to do, but I guess we don't know unless you're in that shoes. What did that feel like for my great grandma? Was that her acknowledging that somebody else had to raise her child, that she wasn't able to do that? And it might have just been too dark and sad of a place for her. I'm sure, without a doubt, she obviously appreciated what these Swedish families did. I think it was just a matter of being able to personally come to those terms and accept it, while she probably felt like this was something that she wanted to keep in her past, and she didn't want to relive the idea that somebody else was raising her child. So yeah, I don't think it was anything more than just a mother not being able to get to that place again of acknowledging that. But I'm sure she had nothing but appreciation for the Swedish families. It was just probably just too hard for her to face.
Yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine the decision to send your children away, as you've made clear. I mean, an amazing decision, a horrendous decision, and obviously a challenge.
And it's a decision that people are still making every day.
Yeah.
There are 80 million people displaced right now, more than during all of World War II. And very often families have to make that choice.
Erin, there's a question that came in about to what degree do the people who HIAS works with today know that HIAS is a Jewish organization or has its roots in the Jewish community? And if there are refugees who come in who may have anti-Semitic views, why should HIAS be helping them?
Okay, well, that's a great question, and I'm happy to answer it. So first, yes, they are aware. Most of our affiliates actually go through the Jewish Family Services, and I've actually been told that the way that a lot of our clients refer to them is Jewish family. So they'll say like, oh, Jewish family is taking care of me, or I love my friends at Jewish family. So it's actually yes, they're well aware, but I think that's also just a really meaningful way that it's often put. I would say that so they are aware. Listen, there's a lot of countries in the world that put out a lot of hateful things. And I'd say a couple of things to that. First, if you're leaving those countries, you're probably not in lockstep with that messaging, or you wouldn't have left. Second, you want to know a really good way to convince somebody that you're not as evil as they think? Protect their family, put a roof over their head, keep them safe from torture and persecution, and help them build a new life. That'll go a long way. And then why help? Because regardless of what they might think about Jews, we know who we are, and we know what it means to be a stranger. And at the end of the day, people are people, and they deserve to be safe. They deserve a basic right to raise their children without being fearful of being persecuted. And that's what we stand for. And we're not, we don't have any kind of test of belief or political view in order to see a person's humanity. And then the last thing I would say is refugees, people who come here to be resettled. Maybe this is the right moment actually to talk about the distinction between a refugee and an asylum seeker. If that's all right with you.
Sure.
So a refugee is somebody who flees the country where they're from because they are in fear of their life for who they are or a group that they belong to. But the big distinction between an asylum seeker and a refugee is that refugees do not come until they are selected for resettlement by the State Department. So by the time a refugee comes here, they have gone through years of vetting. They are the most heavily, even before extreme vetting with this administration, even before that, they were the most heavily vetted immigrant population coming to the United States. So if there are issues around, if there are safety concerns, rest assured that those are very clearly met before they come here. More than any other immigrant group, there has not been a terrorist attack or anything like that perpetrated on US soil by a refugee resettled here in the United States. So I think that's really important to be aware of. And then the other thing I would say, as far as asylum seekers, those are people who come here and say, please let me in. If I go back to my country, I am in fear of my life, let me in. And then they have to apply for legal status. A big piece of what HIAS does in terms of our legal work is helping those people apply for legal status. But refugees who come here, they're already, by the time they come here, they have a path to citizenship. They can get green cards very quickly. Well, nothing's quick right now, but in theory, they can get green cards pretty quick. There's a pathway. It's much harder for asylum seekers. They're not allowed to work until they get legal status, and the asylum system has been more or less broken. So they wait very, very long time in really, really hard circumstances before they can really support themselves. And we are doing a lot to make that a slight bit easier. But anyway, so yes, for all of those reasons, we help people who need help, full stop, regardless of their views. And no, we are not afraid of any kind of existential threat by helping those people.
Well, thanks for the clarification and the response. That's great. You know, Murray, I'm going to turn back to you, Tyler. Murray pointed out a line in the film that she felt was particularly poignant. I'm going to steal your line, Murray, where she says, in the line where your grandfather towards the end of the film says, how do you convey gratitude and thankfulness for a life? And it strikes me that in some degree, your film is conveying the gratitude from the grandson for that life. But I'm wondering if there are particular lines or parts of the film that you look back on and say, well, that's kind of the punch for me. That's a really powerful moment. What is it for you?
Well, that line is certainly one of them. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of lines in the piece that I think were, really important to me. I even felt when my grandfather speaks about, leaving Sweden and the idea that he was leaving a good life or a life he didn't know. Because, most people would think you're going to reconnect with your birth parents, that's an upgrade. But ultimately, my grandfather had a great life in Sweden and he was very happy there. And I thought that was such an interesting, just something I wouldn't have thought of. I wouldn't have realized the internal thoughts about that, about maybe that being, I don't know if this is going to be a better life or not. And ultimately at first it really wasn't, it took time, and, they were living in a fairly well-off Swedish family, and ultimately then were refugees living in Brooklyn and were not well off at all. So, that resonated with me. And I think that line also that you mentioned resonates. There's so much, and obviously the Starfish parable itself was really the biggest one for me, which ultimately is why the film got its name and how that story is told throughout. And I just think it's a perfect example. It's a perfect metaphor for the film. It's the idea of, you can make a difference to one life, you've made a world of difference. And what better feeling than that? And also just the ripple effect that one good deed can have, throwing one starfish back into the water and giving it one chance at life. What's the impact that could have beyond? You look at my family, and, now I have 2 children, so you're looking at generations that have come that, might not have, had it not been for HIAS's work, had it not been for these Swedish families' willingness to, take in strangers. So yeah, I think that's something really big. And another line that really stood out to me is when my aunt is speaking about how when she spoke with the Swedish families and asked why they took in my grandfather and his sisters, and they said, why wouldn't we? And that was something that really stuck out to her. And I think in the film sticks out of, why wouldn't they? That was kind of their approach to it, that they were just a very forward-thinking, empathetic, loving families who basically saw that there were children in need, and they said, why wouldn't we help these children? And I think we would probably be better off world if more people had, I think, just that little bit more open-mindedness and a heart to say that maybe, those Swedish families didn't have to say anything. They could have just went about living their life. They in no way were going to be impacted, but they saw that there was a call for children who needed, and they answered the call. And the call wasn't necessarily to them. They just heard a phone ringing and they answered it. It wasn't necessarily their phone. And I think that's pretty special.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think your aunt also says, she questions whether she would take somebody in today, and recognizing what a challenge that would be and how much of a commitment that would be, and yet knowing that that's exactly what happened for your grandfather.
Totally. And it's not really explored that much in the film because it was really a conversation that I had after the film. But what's really interesting is, so the Silo family, the Swedish family who took in my grandfather specifically, they had lost a young child before taking in my grandfather. And they actually, something you got to think about, and my grandfather also says this throughout the piece, is that, the chances of my grandfather and his sisters ever reconnecting with their parents was so small. So you have to understand, these Swedish families weren't just taking in children as placeholders. They were adopting them for life. And actually, the Swedish mother was actually heartbroken when my grandfather left. And that was a big reason why she came and visited. She felt like she had lost a child. So while his birth parents were gaining their son back, these Swedish families' hearts were ripped apart. Karen, who was Margaret's, sister and best friend, she took a huge loss losing Margaret. And I think my grandfather, those parents, and Agneta, they took a huge loss losing my grandfather as well. They weren't taking in these kids just for a year or two. They had to assume the chances that HIAS was going to be able to also move their parents and then also be able to move the kids. I mean, the amount of puzzle pieces, it's really miraculous. They were taking in these kids to say, okay, you are now my child. So there was also some heartbreak for them as well once, the children left.
Yeah. Erin, I think you see there's one more question about HIAS that's come up, and I think it maybe refer to what's that map behind you. Because one of the countries marked in red there is Israel. And somebody's asking, what does HIAS do in Israel?
Great question. So we've been in Israel since before the founding of the state. We helped Olim who were resettling there. Today we help asylum seekers who often travel thousands of miles, often on foot, for the promise that Israel holds. We work with our team there is Israeli. We do primarily legal work there. So we work within the Israeli legal system to support and advocate for asylum seekers. We have a really great pro bono network that we've built there, and we train law students and lawyers about how to represent asylum seekers. Israel has a pretty low rate of accepting asylum claims compared to the rest of the world. And what we found is that even when someone is accompanied not even by a lawyer, but by a volunteer, their rate of having their claim accepted goes up by 50%. So that operation there has been pretty transformative for the asylum seeking population. We also we work with the UN there to resettle a select group of people. Again, resettling is not a thing we do off the cuff. It's in direct partnership with the State Department and the governments of other host countries. And that's going to be for the especially vulnerable populations, so victims of torture, victims of gender-based violence, people who are in danger because of their gender or sexual identity. And then in addition, we still maintain our legacy programs to support Jewish Olim. We have a scholarship program there that helps people both in for undergrad and also for higher education. And that I think they also have started using that program to help people recertify. So if you sort of had those trades in your country of origin and you want to practice them in Israel, the scholarship program will help with that. That about sums up Israel. Yeah.
That is. All right, super.
And I do want to say that the state of Israel has been a transformative piece for our work, right? To be able to say to the displaced Jews of the world, do you want to come to the United States or do you want to go to Israel? that was a huge component of how we sort of went from needing to be here for the world's Jews versus being able to also help non-Jews, because we were able to give them that option and no one else had that option in the same way. We're very cognizant of that.
Sure. We're pretty much out of time, but I wanted to ask Tyler a little about the reaction you've seen to this film, both in the kind of public and obviously awards and such, and a lot of presentations like ours, but also your family's response.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm very fortunate. It's been, mostly very positive. My family was, always very supportive of the film from day one. It really was. I'm very fortunate on that. And I think we all have that same sense of appreciation that this is now something that's captured and will exist, forever. That, it's something that my kids can watch, and hopefully their kids, and I don't know what technology will look like, and they'll probably be watching it in some crazy ways I can't think of, but it exists. And I think that's really special. And the public too. My goal was to make a film that, could resonate with as many people as possible. And obviously, if you are Jewish, there is a stronger chord. But, I also wanted it to be something that if you weren't Jewish, if you were just a refugee, or if you were just, an aspiring business person, or you were just someone who loved historic pieces, somebody who just wanted a story with a character you could root for, that was really it. And it's always a challenge getting a film out there. Distribution is tough, so I'm very appreciative to organizations like you guys who are willing to help promote it and have conversations. So for those of you who have watched it, I really do appreciate it, and I ask that you share it with friends. If you watch it on a platform, feel free to rate, review, share it with people, because it's kind of a word of mouth thing. It's really one of those films that hopefully finds its audience through word of mouth, and people. Right now we're in a time that there are a lot of people who are in quarantine, elderly who are vulnerable. This is a great film for them. And a big reason why I wanted to put it out now was because I felt like it was a good time for a multi-generational family film that families can discuss and talk about it and feel good. It's rooted in a very difficult time, difficult period of life, but ultimately had a happy ending. And I think that's important. And right now we're living in somewhat dark times again, but it's important to focus on some of these individuals who were able to rise above, and hopefully that inspires some people today in their daily life as well.
Yeah, well, we'll send around a follow-up email with a link to how to view it if people have not yet viewed it. Now, I know that I've been hopping back and forth between the two of you, and we've been jumping around between talking about the film and talking about HIAS. I hope it hasn't been too disjointed. We're running out of time here, and so I'm going to pass the baton back to Murray and ask Murray to make any closing remarks or finish us up. Murray?
Thank you, Tyler, for helping us understand what it was like for your grandfather. And thank you, Erin, for reminding us that the need for organizations like HIAS is as important today as it was in the past. HMTC would also like to thank you, our audience, for participating in our new format. We look forward to our next film, which will also be in a similar format. The film and date will be announced shortly, so stay tuned, stay safe, and stay well. Thank you all.
Well, thanks very much, Murray and Tyler and Erin. Really very pleasant to talk with you, and I loved watching the film and learning more about HIAS. I'm going to make 3 advertisements just at the end here about other upcoming virtual programs that the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center is running. The one is tomorrow at 11 o'clock, my weekly Curator's Corner. This week I'm going to be talking about a photograph of a liberator named Hy Horowitz that we have in our museum. He was an American GI who was later awarded the title of Chevalier of Knight by the French Foreign Legion. And then this coming Friday, on August 14th at 2 o'clock, we're holding a tech workshop for 2Gs, so the descendants of survivors who already have a presentation that they use to share their parents' story. If those people are interested in learning how to share it online in virtual programs, come join our free workshop at 2 o'clock on Friday, and we'll talk about how to make those presentations through Zoom. And then one last advertisement. On Thursday, August 20th at 1 o'clock, please join us for our virtual chair yoga fundraiser. This was rescheduled because of the recent hurricane, but please join us. It's appropriate for all ages, should be fun, and will help limber us up. So that's on Thursday, August 20th. Okay, thanks again to everybody. I appreciate you participating and appreciate the audience for being here too. And wish you all a very good day. Thank you.